it's absolutely fascinating to be back here in Austria, and what a brilliant day of free practice it's been. So many interesting little technical stories to talk about, and we're not going to have the time to get through all of them, but we've got a whole race weekend of that to come. But one of the biggest stories I want to bring your attention to is from pre-season testing and Mercedes' dual-axis steering system. It was controversial at the time, and it's still very controversial now, but Mercedes are definitely using the system here in Austria. Here we're on board with Valtteri Bottas, and you can see how the Finn is using the system as he drives around this circuit in Austria. You can see him pulling the steering wheel back and pushing it forward to adjust the front toe on the car. That's far more aggressive than we saw Lewis Hamilton using it in Barcelona, where he's just using it on the long pit straight. So it's going to be great to see how they use that in the race. So the next thing I wanted to show you was the Racing Point. Now, actually, this is about Mercedes rather more than Racing Point. Ironically, it's a copy of last year's car. We all know about that now. But out on track in free practice 1 and a little bit in free practice 2, the Mercedes engine power unit in the back of this car was repeatedly smoking. Is that a problem with the car and the power unit, or was it just an overfill of fuel or oil? I think it was probably just the overfill of oil in the end. But if there is a reliability problem with the Mercedes power unit, it's one of the few reasons they're allowed to modify the power unit under the homologation regulations. And that means they will be able to make the adjustments on reliability, but it will take a power unit out of the pool. The next thing I wanted to show you was the floor of the Red Bull. Now, we first saw these parts on the base of the floor, the rear of the floor, appear in the shakedown test at Silverstone. Now, there is some debate whether testing new parts on the car is legal, but Red Bull certainly did it, and it's brought those parts to the car in Austria. Now, could there be a protest from another team about that test? I don't think there will be, but it's interesting to see how much development Red Bull is putting into the floor of the car and the aero around the rear tyre. Something else I spotted on the Red Bull, and I think hasn't really been picked up by many people away from the circuit, and it was just that I, by chance, happened to be looking at a different feed, was that Red Bull, in free practice 2 in Austria, fitted a completely new nose to the car. Maybe it needed a new crash test, not sure about that yet, but that's a massive change with the front pylons as well, completely different to the original specification. And then the third of the big teams, Ferrari. It's not been a great day for the Italian team. The car has arrived, the F1000 has arrived in Austria with pretty much absolutely nothing new on it. The homologation regulations means they're going to take this monocoque, the gearbox and most of the other major mechanical components all the way through till the end of 2021. Now, Ferrari have been away, they've been sitting at home in Maranello, not really able to go into the office because of the various crises around the world, and the engineers haven't come up with any new ideas, it seems, for the car as it is, but they now understand what's wrong with the car, and we're going to see a big update package probably come in Hungary, but it's going to be a very difficult couple of Grand Prix for Ferrari until they fix that. And if you're a Ferrari fan, I'm really sorry, it's not going to be pretty viewing. One of the big talking points coming out of testing as well was the Racing Point, or the Tracing Point as some people called it, because the pink car is a straight up copy of last year's Mercedes F1 car, which is probably a sensible thing to do because that won the World Championship, and it's a very fast car indeed. As we saw with the times from practice today, the Racing Point is very, very fast indeed. But not everybody, in particular McLaren and Renault, they're not particularly happy about this approach to car design. Is it an infringement of Mercedes' intellectual property rights? Mercedes don't care. It's a Mercedes gearbox, rear suspension and power unit in the back of that Racing Point. But if it can be proven that Racing Point do not own the intellectual property rights to that car, then it's not legal in Formula One. Andreas Seidel from McLaren said that team probably won't protest the car. We haven't heard a similar assertion from Renault as yet. Racing Point's aping of the Mercedes isn't just limited to last year's car. The team turned up in Austria with a completely new rear wing end plates, which is an interesting design with external strakes and some interesting and distinctive features. And they all seem very familiar, because they were on the Mercedes in Melbourne. The car obviously didn't run in Melbourne, but Racing Point got the pictures. Mercedes have moved on to the next stage though. They've gone for a single pylon rear wing, which is quite an engineering challenge if you think about how that pylon gets through the exhaust. The next thing I wanted to show you is all to do with the circuit in Austria itself. It's got these very, very hard and high curbs. And the McLaren, the drivers were told to keep right off the high curbs. They didn't listen, and if you look down at the left front corner, the driver's broken a bit of the car. that little bit of barge board is a really crucial aerodynamic component, and that will really slow down the driver. But it doesn't just happen on the barge board. Later in the session, one of the other McLaren drivers, or the other McLaren driver, hit a curb and broke the front wing. Now this caused, again, a major problem for the car. Now the question that I've got in my mind, here you see the front wing getting broken, quite seriously, the question I've got in my mind is the McLaren strong enough for the Red Bull ring? Running those curbs is essential to get a good lap time here, but if you can't run the curbs without the car falling apart, you're not going to get that good lap time. So Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris are going to face a real challenge to get a good lap time and not run on those curbs. And as you can see in this video, the whole front wing attachment point has completely failed and the wing's just flapping around free in the air, ruining that car's aerodynamics. That's going to be something to watch in qualifying tomorrow as well as in the race. One team that's come to Austria and clearly hasn't wasted its time in lockdown in both England, where the team is based, and in France, where the power unit side of the company is based, is Renault. They've come along with a completely new front wing here in Austria, with a completely different end plate, comparing the Australian spec that you see on your screen to the new spec here in Austria. It's an entirely different shape, and there's a little vent at the trailing edge of it, so that's quite interesting to see. And then the main plane, the upper element of the front wing, if you look, is just a totally different shape at the end. Now this could have been a change that Renault thought they were going to bring to Austria anyway, because teams bring different front wing packages to different races, or is it just something they found in the wind tunnel or in their own heads in their time off? Renault have also been spending a lot of time looking at the wake behind that front wing and how it interacts with the barge board, and they've brought an entirely new barge board and leading edge of the floor to Austria. Here we can compare what they've got in Australia, where you've got this section with louvers at the front of it, and here in Austria they've got these little towers of carbon fibre to channel that air exactly how they want it in the wake of the front wheel. It's a huge bit of work to be able to develop something that intricate and make it work on track. It looks like Renault have managed it though, and that's a lot of time in CFD and a lot of time in the wind tunnel. Question is, were they thinking about this before Melbourne, or have they come up with this since they were allowed to go back to work after the end of lockdown? Something to ponder, something we might find out from the team.